Hi, I'm Pete Holloway. I'm a retired financial advisor and a retired certified financial planner, and as always, it's my great pleasure to have you on Money. My guest today is Laura Jackson. Laura is an author. We've never had an author on before. We've had politicians, inventors, entrepreneurs, and so forth. And I thought it'd be fun to have someone who is in the creative arts. Laura is a graduate of the Lindsley School, got an undergraduate degree in environmental science, and then an MFA from Chatham. She's been a freelance writer for a number of years and has two children, ages 14 and 18, and I want to thank you for coming aboard.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Okay, you're a writer. How and when did you know that you had to be a writer?
Well, when I was in fourth grade, our teacher would have us, we would have creative writing day, and I always enjoyed creative writing day, and I found that I was pretty good at creative writing day, and notably my stories were all funny stories. I started to find that it was funny, that it was fun to make people laugh, and so I began to realize at that age that I loved writing, and that continued through high school, but then I got away from it, and for 15 years I didn't write a whole lot until I was a young mom, a stay-at-home mom with kids, and I just started coming back to it a little bit, and then one day, almost by accident, or maybe it's the magical social media algorithm, an advertisement for Chatham University's Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program appeared out of the blue, and it was just one of those moments where I realized I need to do this. I need to do this. And I jumped back in, and I haven't looked back, and I have no idea what universal entity put that in front of my face that day, but it came back just like that, and I realized this is where I'm going.
We're glad it did.
I am too.
Now, how did you develop your skill?
Well, I think, I don't know if every writer would say this, but I think a lot of writers are sort of naturally good at writing, in the same way that if you're naturally handy, you might gravitate towards electrical work or carpentry or something like that. If you're good at something, you tend to like something, and if you like something, you tend to be good at something. That said, I worked pretty hard in high school, and Lindsley really emphasized writing, and I worked really hard in graduate school, and I had to learn how much I didn't know, and so...
Can you give me, I'm not a writer, so what are some of the things you didn't know?
Well, there are so many subtle elements. Like, for example, this is an essay collection that I've written that we'll talk about in a minute, and what goes into putting an essay collection together. What would link these essays, understanding how a narrative should flow, character development for people who are fiction writers, avoiding cliches, writing like other writers, not writing like other writers, that sort of thing. And you learn a lot, and I knew I was a pretty good writer, but the skills were not sharpened by any stretch, and I didn't have an English background. I had an environmental science background, so there was a lot that the 22-year-olds in my program knew that I did not know, so I had to play catch up. I was the 36-year-old old lady in the program.
To use a sports metaphor, two things. First of all, who are your coaches that brought you along? And second, an athlete today or a concert pianist, they have to practice every single day doing something. What do you do to keep in shape? And what kind of exercises do you do such a thing?
Well, there are an awful lot of writers who say that if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day, period. You must write every day. I don't agree with that, nor do I write every day by any stretch. Ironically, the thing that keeps me in the best shape for writing is leaving my desk and leaving the computer. And so writing is the emptying, the pouring out of creativity. And you can't pour anything out of that creative cup if you don't have anything in it. And you can sit there and sort of pound the paper, and at some point you have to get up and you have to walk away, and you have to find what's going to fill up that creative cup. And for some people that's reading, or being with other writers, and for me, that's running around in the woods. That's
Whatever.
and as we'll talk about, I am a nature writer, so being outdoors and being away from the page is actually what fills my cup up, and then when I return to the page, I'm fresh with all these experiences, and my anxiety has been quelled, and I can think a lot more clearly, and I also get a lot of inspiration when I'm out in the world, out in the natural world, and so that's just that's how I exercise that muscle.
We'll discuss your book in a minute, but the nature part of it really is fun. Excuse me. Again, back to the process. Do you sit down with a pencil and paper, pen and paper? Do you sit at a keyboard? Do you dictate? And why?
I'll dictate in the car occasionally because and I even used to have a waterproof pad in my shower because everybody has great ideas in the shower that don't stick around. But I use keyboard. I have always typed on the computer. I can't write fast enough to keep up with my brain. But one thing I've learned over time, and a lot of writers struggle with this, is the tendency to self-edit as we go. I write a sentence and I go, I could do that better. Well, that really is plugging up the flow of creativity. It's plugging up the narrative. So I will cover up my computer screen, or I'll even get this. I have this little device, and it's just an old-timey word processor, and it's got a tiny little screen, and you can only see the sentence that you've just written, and you just go and you do like what they call a brain dump. So that's really important. That self-editing will hinder the flow. So that's how I do that. I type, but I don't look.
Now, do you go back over it, or is it just once it's on the paper, it's done? Do you get the eraser out, or?
I mean, after I'm done with the brain dump, usually I'll wait a day or two because you're not objective in those moments. But I'll go back a day or two later, and usually with the first draft, you go, oh, that's horrible, but you work it and you edit it, and the editing takes 10 times longer than the writing ever does.
I'm sure.
So it is a process, and it's like pulling a sculpture out of marble. And sometimes it comes easier than others, and sometimes it's a 10-year journey.
Some of the people watching us are aspiring writers. What advice would you have for them?
Well, the first piece of advice that I would give them is don't refer to yourself as an aspiring writer. You are a writer. If you write, you are a writer. If you put a poem on a napkin at dinner, you are a writer. If no one has ever read what you've written, you're still a writer. So writers don't have to have degrees. They don't have to have published books. You are a writer because you know in your heart that you are a writer. If you write, you're a writer. I would say read. Writers read. It's very helpful to find your tribe, to find other writers, to find a writing group. There's tremendous inspiration. There's support there, and you'll also be exposed to genres that you don't focus on. So if you're a mystery writer, you'd be exposed to literary writing, and if you're a poet, you can be exposed to various other types of fiction. So it's really important to expose yourself to other writers, to other types of writing, and also I can't emphasize how much fun and how supportive the community is when you go to a conference. Writing conferences are really, really wonderful to help you find your direction as a young writer and as a older writer too.
Speaking of that, you have been a strong supporter of West Virginia writers. Tell us a little about West Virginia writers and how you see them as separate from Utah writers or Maine writers or whatever.
Well, so there's an actual organization called West Virginia Writers, and maybe that's what you're talking about, but maybe you're just speaking of writers in West Virginia in general. That's a very old organization, and it's a wonderful collection of writers around the state. And the thing I like about writers in West Virginia is we're such a small state. We're such a rural state. And we're also so dang friendly. And so there's such camaraderie. And I think when you go to, like for the West Virginia writers, we have a conference every summer. And I've never been to a conference where I felt so welcomed, and I felt, I checked in, I went to registration my first time. I was scared to death. I didn't know anybody. I had decided to come at the last minute. And one of the senior writers adopted me. She said, "We're going to lunch right now." And I said, "Okay." And I had friends by the end of lunch. And
wonderful.
They have become some of my best friends in the world. And I don't know if you could go to a New York Writers Conference or Utah Writers Conference and be told that you are family within the first half hour. And we really are a family, and I suppose it's just because we're so small, but we also have this West Virginia thing in common where we feel misunderstood by the rest of the world, and we know what it's like to be West Virginians, but nobody else does, and so that really bonds us in ways that I don't know if you would find in another state.
Yes, and again, we'll cover that in that book, your book, because it speaks so much to that. Who were some of your favorite West Virginia writers? Now, obviously, you just name a couple, but there are lots and lots out there.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're lucky to have Mark Harshman here in Wheeling.
Mark's wonderful.
And the Pancakes.
Oh, yes, Anne Pancake. Yeah, she's wonderful, too. And Kirk Judd is a wonderful poet. Carter Taylor Seton, she lives down in Huntington, and she's written fiction and nonfiction. She's done biographies. She's incredibly talented. And then we have some younger writers like Nima Avagia. She no longer lives in West Virginia, but she's written a memoir of growing up queer and Indian in Appalachia, and she's a phenomenal writer. So there are no shortage. You can find as many wonderful writers in West Virginia as anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, recently, in fact, I was lucky enough to attend it. You had a get-together of Wheeling, or local writers.
Right,
And
yep.
I was amazed by some, because some I did not know, and
Yeah.
wowie.
Yeah, there's so much talent in West Virginia, and especially here in Wheeling. It's a great group, and I consider myself lucky to get to socialize with these folks.
Okay, got to give you a plug. Let me borrow the book. This is her book that was just published called Deep and Wild. For what it's worth, I just was at Books A Million, saw it on the shelves there. Amazon.
You can
And,
find it on the publisher's website. That's Autumn House. You can find it at Tamarack. You can find it at the Culture Center in Charleston. You can find it at Taylor Books in Charleston.
We'll get a picture. This back picture is so funny. The book is so funny. It is such a love story about West Virginia, and it covers everything from stories of people to critters.
Critters, varmints.
Varmints.
Yep.
Because there are large sections that are devoted to possums and crayfish.
Yep. There are a lot of critters in that book.
Bats and so forth, and some very, very, very funny writing. And I was wondering if you could read a passage to us.
I'd be happy to.
Let us know what.
I would be happy to. I'll give you about 4 minutes here. So, as you probably remember, Pete, as everyone in the area remembers, we had an outbreak of the periodical cicada that comes every 17 years, back in 2016, I think it was. So I didn't remember.
Another critter.
Yes, another critter. And the previous time they had come, I'd been in college, so I hadn't seen them then. And the time before that, I was 3. So this was really my first experience with the periodical cicadas, and I had been a little bit anxious about it. The cicadas fascinated my kids. We sat outside and watched them crawl up the trees, shed their exoskeletons, and unfurl their paper-thin wings. The boys played gently with the new adults, placing them on Matchbox cars and in the co-pilot seat of the Millennium Falcon next to Chewie. They wore the cicadas on their ears and noses, and the cicadas, exhausted from metamorphosis and the first day of the end of their lives, obliged. For all the bugs knew, this was it, the climax of their existence. And if they were disappointed that they'd crawled around in the dirt for 17 years, survived rodents and dog pee, and grew a sexy body for the beady-eyed ladies, only to find themselves dangling from a 6-year-old's left nostril, they were polite enough to keep it to themselves. But the cicadas did sing. It was louder than I'd expected, and more arrived each day. They emerged and sang, followed by more, who emerged and sang, followed by more. They poured out of the ground for 2 weeks. Like buffet goers, some came early, most came on time, and some straggled in at the last minute. And this stretched the whole event out into 6 weeks of cicadas. And unlike the Dog Day cicadas that perched politely in their trees, Brood 5 flew around Madcap and Higgledy-Piggledy. They buzzed our heads. They sat on our shoulders and squealed in our ears, and they were particularly attracted to the riding lawnmower. Every time I mowed, they dive-bombed my face and clung to my shirt, hoping to woo the giant, sexy craftsman that purred in just the right timbre. Our dog ate and barfed them up on my bedroom carpet every evening. And I've got a strong stomach, but when I saw the contents, rotten exoskeletal husks sprinkled with decaying red eyeballs, I barfed. And then my son Ben sympathy barfed in an act of intestinal solidarity. They were loud. Periodical cicadas' decibel level combined with their sheer numbers make them one of the loudest sounds in nature, landing on the auditory offense scale somewhere between a troop of howler monkeys and the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. The males call to females with their timbal organ, a ridged membrane on their abdomens that, when contracted, makes a click. The cicadas contracted up to 480 times per second, turning the single click into a continuous drone when it bounces off the human eardrum. An air sac in their abdomen amplifies the sound further, and they use their wings to direct it at the ladies. The chorus was deafening. By July, the human population of West Virginia's northern panhandle was overstimulated, irritable, and disgusted. We'd watch the long days of the summer solstice from our air-conditioned living rooms. We couldn't sit outside. Most of us had lost some hearing. Some people had eaten one, either by accident or on the heels of several Pabst Blue Ribbons, and a few unlucky souls had been molested by lecherous hemipterans while trimming quarter round on the driveway with a buzzing miter saw. The whole thing started to stink. They started to stink too. As the cicadas' life cycle wound down, their carcasses littered the ground and rotted in the midsummer humidity. The entire neighborhood became an homage to the inevitability of death and decay. The stains on my carpet, a semi-digested memento mori, even Stanley Steamer couldn't erase. So while the cinematic weeping of stringed instruments was more than capable of dissolving nature lovers into sniveling snot bubbles, this is a reference to the violins that were played on a preview. There was a movie about the cicadas, and they had used violins to make everybody fall in love with the cicadas. So while the cinematic weeping of stringed instruments was more than capable of dissolving nature lovers into sniveling snot bubbles, the phlegm flowed a lot more freely in the beginning, before we'd plucked periodical cicadas from our bras, beards, and vodka tonics. And then they were gone. They passed on their genes and died, the only quiet thing they'd done as adults. The air cleared of song and scream and the ground of fetid funk. Newborn nymphs dropped out of the trees and burrowed back into the earth to wait out wars and presidents and our children's years at home. We heard birds again, and katydids. We opened our windows and doors, fired up our barbecues, and invited our friends to the deck. We said that was the worst. We've got to move before they come back. And then we forgot about them. That was probably their plan all along.
Terrific. Again, it's, deep and wild. We're taping this early November, and you're having a book signing tonight, but by the time this is on the air, the book signing will have happened. But this will be available, again, at Amazon, Books A Million, and so forth. What's next on the agenda?
Well, my next project, at the moment, I am working on a book called 100 Things to Do in Wheeling Before You Die. So it's a little bit of shift. There's a little less creativity, but it's going to be a really fun local project, and I get to choose restaurants and outdoor activities and things like the symphony and things to do at Ogilvy Park, so that whether you're a local or whether you're a visitor, there's going to be something for you to do and something for you to find in Wheeling. So it's a big shift, but I'm looking forward to it.
And any novel or anything like that? War and Peace is not on the horizon yet.
I've never written a word of fiction, and I have not had luck even in the attempts to do so, but I continue to have West Virginia adventures with my kids. So there are more stories in the draft folder. So this is not the last book of West Virginia that I'll be writing, I'm sure.
Do you teach?
Not regularly, no.
Okay.
No.
You didn't. That face gave it away. That it's not something
I will be the first to admit that teaching intimidates me.
Great. Well, let's leave it at that. That was terrific. Again, I would advise. I really enjoyed this book. It's a series of essays, and they range from love stories about West Virginia to critters, and it really is at times hysterically funny. I have one of the best laughs I've had in quite a while.
Is that right?
It was about, you were talking about crawdads.
Ah, yes.
Another critter, and one of your friends was at the Hamptons, as fancy as it gets, and there's a big stack of langoustine with probably all sorts of fancy sauces. And she looked at that and said, where I come from, they call that bait. Which is just such a wonderful story, because that pile probably cost $300-400.
Absolutely. This is totally a West Virginia moment that nobody at the party would have understood except a West Virginian.
There you go. Well, again, I want to thank you very much. Thank you for writing this. Keep writing, please, because we all would love to see more. And Anyway, thank you very much. I'm Pete Holloway. We'll be seeing you next week. Have a great week.